Power and status, they share some similarities. They're fundamental human needs, meaning all human beings seek them out in varying ways to varying degrees. And when we get them, life feels better. It's more satisfying. And when we don't have them, life is worse. And even our physical health, our mental health, any resource we have that allows us to have control over someone, whether that is another person or ourselves, is going to be a source of power. Feeling in control is at least of yourself. Having that autonomy is such an important component to us being able to live lives we want to live.
Alison, thank you so much for being with us today. Welcome to the show.
I am so happy to be here. Thanks.
Well, we are going to have a far-ranging conversation today. You have a new book out. I'm very excited to speak about it. And in the meantime, to get us started, could you put in your own words your area of focus and interest, why you're on the show today? Give us a little context for those who might not be familiar with your work.
Absolutely. So I study status, power, and influence. So we'll talk about these kind of things, but basically, how can we get the rewards that we really care about? How can we convince people to do the things that we want to do? So that's my very broad umbrella, or my sandbox that I like to play in, is how to get people respect, how to get people rewards, and how to get people to say yes to the things they really want.
Okay. That's not very seductive at all. Power, rewards, success. These are just, casual things that some people may or may not. Well, we know that everybody wants them, but your work specifically comes with the basis of behavioral science. So first of all, how did you get interested in this stuff? And, describe some of, I guess, your early interests and passions around that stuff, because was it always oriented toward success and power? Were those things that you were interested in studying and learning about? Or did you find your way into those through some other vehicle or direction?
Absolutely. So for the past 20 years, I've been an organizational psychologist and professor. And I always say that was not my childhood dream. I do not know if I had a childhood dream, but it wasn't that. I did, however, always have an interest in psychology and thinking about what other people thought. And I thought psychology was interesting, never pursued it because I didn't understand that you could make a career out of it. And I remember in college, whenever there was a class that crossed my path that was about human behavior, I thought that sounds cool. And I would take them, but not with any thought about what I would do with it. I was just drawn to it. Then I went to be a management consultant. And I was thrown into these situations where I had to work in other people's organizations to solve problems we were paid to solve, but with people who didn't necessarily want us to be there because, they make movies about the fact that consultants are coming. So nobody likes the consultants. And I started to think about, okay, well, this is my job. I have to get people who don't know me and don't trust me and don't like me to want to work with me. So I started thinking a lot about, all right, well, how do you do these things? How do you influence people and motivate them and negotiate with them? And I found it both fascinating and really hard. And at that point, as I was realizing I did not want to be a consultant for the rest of my life, I thought, wonder what there is in psychology. And so I went back to thinking about that and uncovering at that point this idea of bringing together my interest in helping people work better. That's the organization piece, with doing that through understanding people better. That's the psychology piece. And once I figured that you could do both of those things, it was this massive light bulb. And I chose to pursue that path. So I always had an interest, but I was not like doodling in my third grade notebook, like I want to be a behavioral scientist who teaches in a business school when I grow up.
I want to focus on the power part, because you gravitated towards a couple different aspects of that behavioral and organizational psychology. Power is a very big, broad term, and yet it's seductive. It's also a little bit scary. People think I get it in sort of like there's uh, a connotation of like, I don't know. There's just something there about power. And yet I'm a huge advocate for personal power. So talk to us about power in general, why you gravitated toward it. It's a huge piece of your research, your writing topics. And I feel like we're seduced by it, a little bit scared. It's loaded culturally. So is that make it an interesting area of study? power, status, wealth. Um, why that?
Yeah, so I mean, when you said this, I'm thinking, and I won't be able to quote her 100% verbatim, but Rosabeth Moss Cantor, when writing "Women and Men in the Corporation," power is like our last dirty little secret. Those who
Yeah.
want it deny it, and those who pursue it do it secretly. Those kind of things. Um, so, power and status, and I actually say we'll talk about the distinction, but I care about them equally, and perhaps even more about status. But they share some similarities, and so in answering that, one, they're fundamental human needs, meaning all human beings seek them out in varying ways to varying degrees. And when we get them, life feels better. It's more satisfying. And when we don't have them, life is worse. And even our physical health, our mental health. Power is controlling resources that people value. And sometimes those people can be you. So money can be a resource. Money can be a source of power. That if I have money, then I have autonomy and I don't have to do what you tell me to do, or I can work the way I choose to work, or not work, or work from anywhere. So any resource we have that allows us to have control over someone, whether that is another person or ourselves, is going to be a source of power. So when you think about people that you think of describing as having power over you, it's going to be because they have something that you value. And if you have power over somebody else, it's going to be because you control something that they value. So it's everybody wants it, no matter, again, to Rosabeth Moss Cantor's point, regardless of whether they will admit it in public conversation, we all value it and life feels better with it. And the thing I care about as a psychologist is I love to help people work better, but more fundamentally, I want to help people live better. And work is important because we spend a lot of our life at work. And so if your work is bad, it's hard for your life to feel good. But more broadly, inside work, outside work, feeling in control is at least of yourself, right? Having that autonomy is such an important component to us being able to live the lives we want to live.
One of the things that helped me in your recent book, which I feel it's probably a good time to introduce it, but I'm going to keep it under wraps just for another 120 seconds and get you to answer this question. So I think your answer just before this was very prudent and on point, and yet it still feels a little risky. Like, to seek power, it seems like you're saying something out loud that everyone thinks and no one says, which is part of how I was able to really appreciate your most recent book. And you talk about it in this book as a little bit of a game. That helps me a lot. Status as a game. I'm wondering if you can articulate, am I alone in thinking that seeking status and power feels like a dirty thing, the dirty thing that no one's talking about yet everyone's doing, and how the gamification sort of can at least it soothed my psychology. Maybe I'm a weirdo, but just talk to me about the relationship between these things.
Yeah, I do think it's hard for people to admit that they want these things, which is somewhat ironic because, again, fundamental human needs, all people want them. So it almost thinks we could create a new equilibrium where we would all talk about them. For people who feel like that holds them back from seeking those things, I would say these are resources. Power and status are resources. Those resources can help you live a better life, but those resources can also help other people live better lives. And so for people who say, I don't want to seek power because it feels icky, you don't have to use your power simply to benefit you. If you had the ability to hire and fire, reward and punish, pay, you could do that to build the world you wanted to live, to hire the people that you think have been overlooked but shouldn't, right? To pay the people who have been underpaid. And so one of the messages I want to offer for people who do think it's icky is they are simply resources, and resources can be used for all different kinds of things, and they don't just have to to benefit to benefit you. Um, and then you asked me something else. There was a second part to that I want to answer, but I completely forgot what it was. So you're going to say it again, and I'm going to say what
Well,
I said, say what I
the
wanted to say.
the second part is just how the gamification
Oh,
of it.
yes.
It seems like, to me, that made it a lot more endearing is too strong, but it's just basically it allowed me to see through or past the culturally loaded nature of it.
Yes. Okay. So I am by no means a game expert, but I did a little bit of reading, and I was surprised that there game experts debate on what the definition of a game is. But I was struck by one. that had some traction, and it describes a game as a problem solving activity approached with a playful attitude. And I thought, wow, doesn't that really describe a lot of human behavior? And so, I say, if you play Monopoly, that's a game. But, I have a high schooler, like getting into college is a game. It's a problem to solve, but you could approach it with a playful attitude. Asking someone on a date can be a game, but also managing status and power can be a game. It's a problem to solve, but you can approach it with joy and with authenticity and not it to be something that feels icky. Because if anything feels icky, I mean, we're just not going to do them. So we have to find joy in the things that we're doing. So I like the idea of the analogy of power and status as a game because it's a problem and you can approach it with joy, authenticity, and play. And also, I think the game label is apt because we also know that games aren't always fair. Sometimes things happen that aren't your fault. You get hurt or somebody makes a bad call. And so we've learned in games, whether they're board games or, sports competitions, that sometimes things don't go our way, but that doesn't mean we can't win and that we don't just simply wallow in the thing that didn't go our way. We say, all right, well, that didn't work to my advantage, but let me see what else I got to pull out a good outcome. And I think that is also really apt for helping people think about status and power because sometimes things don't go your way. Sometimes you start from the starting line with a disadvantage you do not deserve. Sometimes you encounter an obstacle, but that doesn't mean just because the game isn't always fair, doesn't mean you can't have a good outcome.
All right. There are differences. I mean, just if you look through the lens that you just described, there are, and with these attributes as resources, there are therefore people who have more resources, more status and power, and people who have less. How ought we think about like what sets these two groups apart? And obviously, it's a continuum, right? It's like power on one end and less, no power on the other. But if you think of them as something that can be set apart from another, someone who has it or doesn't, has status, power, does not, what are the distinct characteristics of each, and how might people who are seeking status navigate that in this authentic? Again, you can see if you're a longtime listener to the show, then you're watching me figure this out in real time because I want to play this game and I want to not feel dirty and I want to use resources. I want to have resources to achieve some of the objectives that I have in the world, my own creative universe, and create a universe that is better for other people. And I want to do it authentically. I'm aware that I have status in some areas and not others. And I think I'm a lot like a lot of people. Help us navigate no status, some status, high status, what separates us, and how do we get more of what we want?
Absolutely. So let's start with a definition of what status is. So, power is controlling resources. Status is being respected and regarded by your audience, how much other people respect and regard you. So, it's a judgment that exists only in other people's minds. But that judgment, when we become aware of it, has a real impact on our quality of life. Again, we seek to live a life where other people value us. And when we know we're valued, it helps our lives. We, again, physical and mental health. When we know we're not valued, we're not respected, it hurts our life. So that's what it is. It's getting other people to respect and highly regard us. Now, you can say, right, there's a variety of things we can start to understand with that definition. First, as I move throughout my day, I confront different audiences. In some, they might look at me as a person they highly respect. And then in others, not naming names, but I've got 3 kids, like I go into another audience and no one seems to respect anything I have to say. So that's one thing, is as our audience changes, our status changes. And some people start out in a relationship with more status than others. So status is going to come from 2 things. In psychology, we call them ascribed and achieved, but I think the easier way is to just call them like things you don't control and things you control. So some of our status is affected by things we don't really control. Gender is a status characteristic. Race is. Appearance is. Height is. Ethnicity. Accent, all kinds of things could affect that another person sees us and says, wow, I really regard that person. And those things are not controllable. And they generally, for the most part, not controllable. And they generally don't have a real meaning for how, capable somebody actually is. But we give them meaning. Society has given them meaning.
Got it.
Then there are things that we call them achieve, but they are more controllable. So an educational credential, for example, could be a form of status that, okay, I have a PhD in organizational behavior. Maybe some people would say, oh, I'm more interested, I'm more likely to respect Alison's thoughts on the science of human behavior at work because she has the PhD. Well, that would be controllable by me and an indicator of my respect. But a lot of other things that are way less work than getting a PhD are also controllable indicators of status. All right. Um, how I speak, right? My verbals and my nonverbals. How I interact with other people. Like, am I friendly to them? Am I complimenting them? Am I giving some advice? So we can, as we unpack it, we can get an almost limitless set of behaviors that we could have access to and pull from, like a really long, like Cheesecake Factory menu, right? Remember the Cheesecake Factory? Like just
Oh,
so many things,
I
right?
hate to
You just,
remember it, but I remember it.
right?
Yes.
You're like, this thing has like subsections. Anyway, that you can pull from. And you're like, from this menu are all of these controllable things that I could use to impact how other people respect me. And it doesn't, most of those things do not involve like working harder. It's simply tweaking the way another person looks at you, as they're deciding how much they respect you. So we've got the uncontrollable and the controllable.
Okay, let's talk about the controllable, because to me that is a good place to start. And then I want to talk specifically because your book is very focused on a couple of those that are not controllable, which I think is fascinating and really timely and important for our conversation today. And yet, for the biggest possible audience, I want to start with the ones that are controllable for us. Um, and I would like you to help us, because if you stack ranked them, let's address a few of the ones that are controllable. And this is my own framework. You talk about it a little differently in the book, a little more elegantly, but uh, let's just say that have the highest ROI, things that we can do to drive our own status that are most accessible. PhD was a great example. Slow, expensive. And there are some other ones
Exactly.
that are
No one's
short and
doing that.
fast. Right. So, I mean, I like the 4-year arc. That's a nice, thing to have on the old resume and at the end of your name. And for purposes of our conversation today, let's talk about the ones that we can control and the ones where the ROI is high.
Absolutely. Okay. So can we talk about the title of the book? Because I think
I'm,
it'll,
I'm going to say it because you don't, I want you,
you
I don't
say
want you
it.
to feel like you, Likeable
Okay.
Badass. Okay. First of all, amazing title, Likeable Badass. The subhead, which again, I think opens a conversation that we absolutely need to have, which is how women get the success they deserve. So that is there are, as you mentioned, gender is a thing that is not chosen. And it's very, very focused on, I think it's very important that we have to have that conversation. And yet, Likeable Badass. If I say, would you like to be a likable badass? I do not know anyone who says no. So let's start
100%.
there. But you integrate the title as you see fit, because you're the one who's the wisdom holder here.
Absolutely. So if you want to come back to the women piece, we can talk about it and you'll ask me. But what I would say is that there's nothing in this book in terms of advice that is specific to women, which raises the question, why'd you write it for them? And again, I'll answer it later if you're curious. But there's
Great.
nothing here that is specific to women. Status is a fundamental need that we all share, and the ideas are the same. Okay, so yes, I love the title was my non-negotiable when I envisioned this book, Likeable Badass, and everyone, to your point, who hears it says, yes, that's exactly what I'm going for. And it is simply my catchy term for the underlying science of where status comes from. So when you look at another person and say, do I respect that person? That decision in your brain is not a random decision. It's based on you evaluating two things about them. You're going to evaluate how much do they care about other people, because we respect people who aren't just out for themselves. We respect people who do good things for other. If I interact with you, are you going to help me? Am I going to like talking to you? Are you going to be pleasant to be around? Those, if we don't think those things, we generally don't respect the person. When we do think those things, we do. So that's the likable piece. I use the term likable, and psychologists would call it warmth. Doesn't really matter what you call it, but it's basically, do you care about people other than yourself?
Oh,
And the other dimension is Are you good at getting stuff done? Are you capable in some domain, whatever that domain is? If I give you a task, can I be sure that at the end it'll be done well, done quickly, done right? The more I believe that you've got skills, and those skills again benefit me because you don't just care about yourself, then I also respect that. So in psychologists, we call it assertiveness. On the book title, I call it badass. But it's basically, there in psychology is this two-dimensional space. So I'll use my arms and I'll say x-axis, y-axis. And we have vertically, we have this capability dimension. I call it assertiveness. Horizontally, we have warmth. And we have this quadrant. And the quadrant of, if I can convince you that I am very capable and I am caring, that is the no-fail, surefire recipe for you to respect me. So likable badass is, yes, it's what we're going for. It's the quadrant we all want to be in. And when we're in it, because we're all psychologists, even though you couldn't articulate it quite this way, you knew. When we're in that, it feels good and we get the respect that we want. And when someone sees us that way and we can tell that they see us that way, it feels good. So that's the quadrant we're trying to get. So what I help people do, to your point, controllable, easy things, are to think about how to show up as often as you can to as many people as you can in that quadrant. Will you get everybody at all times? No. But hey, let's dream big and say, what if everybody in the world could see us as really capable and really caring? Imagine the opportunities that opens up for us, not just to live the life we want to live, but then to be able to elevate other people and do all of that, control our own path, et cetera. So that's what we're going for, is we are going for easy, controllable ways to get people to see us as capable and caring as much as possible.
Give me some specific
Okay.
things that will cultivate you thinking that I am very competent and that I care about other people, because that, there's a whole universe of possibilities there. And I'm just for give us something to latch onto here. Give me a couple examples.
Okay. So where it all comes down to is controlling the two channels of communication that you have available to you. Everything that anyone in this world knows about you originated from one of two places. It either came directly from you. So someone listened to something you said on a podcast, they met you at the grocery store, they read something you put on social media, whatever it is, that originated with you. Or someone that you interacted with went and told somebody else. So now they've been your agent or your messenger. So everything that anyone in this world believes about you came from one of those two sources. And so what I help people think about is, how do you control those two sources? So the first one is control what you put out into the world. And that is to think about, how can I put out things in the world that show me as capable and show me as caring? And the options would be limitless. I always say, anytime you have an opportunity to solve somebody else's problem in a way that showcases your capabilities, bam, you're a hero, whatever it is. So, it could be, and I was telling the story recently, like, you could say anybody can do something. Making introductions is one of my absolute favorites because everybody knows somebody. It takes you about 3 minutes to make an email introduction. And if the introduction is mutually beneficial, then two people in 3 minutes now think that you have some capabilities, you know people, and you were willing to use your network for their benefit. You're caring. So that's a great example. Literally anyone can do that. And I have the best evidence for you. And that is that my son, I have three kids. My oldest son's a teenager, went to a sleepaway but academic program, texts me after the first night and says, Mom, I think this leadership person that's teaching us does kind of what you do. Could I introduce you? And I said, sure. And then he had to say, how do I do it? And he's like, and he texts me a photo. He writes my phone number and my email on a piece of paper and he sends me, is this okay? So it's like introduction 101. Yes, that's okay. Take the paper to the person. He walks up after this big 200-person lecture and says, I think you'd like, my mom would like to meet you. And the woman at first says, am I in trouble? Like some student wants me to meet their mom, but okay, I'll bite. So she reaches out to me on LinkedIn. We agree to meet for coffee when I pick him up from the program. Within 5 minutes, we realize that we both serve women. We're both leadership experts, and we both have all these ways we can support each other. And now we've started this relationship of, she has a nonprofit in Chicago that I'm going to try to plug into and all these different things. And I say, do you know who made that intro? A 15-year-old boy who, by the way, before I came here, I had to step over the most massive pile of clothes to even get to my office that he had left on the floor. So his skills are suspect in a lot of domains. but he could make an intro. An intro is something you could do. And so the key about an intro is I'm capable and I'm caring. So when people start to look for it, what I always say is start with what you love to do. If you're a social media person and you're spending all your time there, you can use your social media, right? You can use it to connect people. You can use it to put information out there that other people would benefit from. Or you could even use your skills to help somebody. So I saw a young woman in an audience, young relative to me, in an audience that I was in, said something like she clearly was really into Instagram, and she was actually documenting the event for the event organizers on Instagram. And she said, how do you balance authenticity, Allison? Because I love being on social media, but I'm working with these people who are older than me, that think it's silly and they don't respect what I'm doing. And I said, well, have you ever used it to help them? Because guess what I would love? Someone to help me be better on social media. So if they said, you know what I'm really good at? I'm really good at reels. Could I take a video of you and like help you post it for your business or whatever? Sure. Now all of a sudden you've done what you love, but for the benefit of another person. So that's one, is starting to control the channel, your channel, of looking for things that you already like to do and just like, how can I benefit somebody else? And then the other one is control the channel of what other people say about you. So we've been so conditioned to be told from a young age, right? That thinking the idea of knowing someone's talking about you behind your back, you're like, "Ugh," right? It feels awful.
Right.
But a lot of what people say about us behind our back is actually positive. It's how the introductions get made, I'm sure, right? You're
Yeah.
overwhelmed with people who want to be on your show, but if someone writes to you that you already value and they say, I have your next great guest, the bar for what that person has to do when they show up to convince you to be their guest is so much lower because that other person has already promoted them.
Yeah.
And so that channel of people talking about us behind our back in a good way is this super effective way to build our status, because those people can just say that we are the next, best thing since sliced bread, and there's no, threat to our modesty whatsoever. And it's super efficient because while we're doing this, imagine that there's like all these people running around telling everybody else how awesome we are. And by the time we hang up, we're like, oh my goodness, look how much status has been built for us. So that channel is really important. And we know it's awesome when it happens. But what I help people think about is you can make it happen more often. You can get other people to say good things about you. Yes, you showing up as capable and caring is baseline. But if someone thinks good things, they're more likely to go and tell the world. If you can, do a couple things. One, if you did nothing else as a simple behavior, if you did nothing, but every time you thought positively about somebody, you went and told another person, that alone would be a hugely status building behavior for you. Because whether we like it or not, we know we live in this world of a super efficient grapevine. There's no such thing as a private conversation. Well, that's actually great if you're talking people up, because then you know that I just went and said something good about you. And you are just like all human beings, you're drawn to reciprocity. And you're like, Allison was nice to me. I got to be nice to Allison. How can I be nice to Allison? I got to tell somebody how great she is. So without even asking you, I've gotten you to build my status by me building yours first. And so that's a simple thing that we can always do, is look for the opportunity to say the truthful, authentic, amazing thing about somebody else's good work. That's hugely strategic. And I think I see so many people think those things and not let them out into the world. And
Yeah.
I think that's a wasted opportunity for you to do good for another human being while you're also going to get it back.
Mm.
And then one scarier, and then I'll pause. One scarier than that is to actually ask people to promote you. I always say people who care about you want to make you happy. So I'll give you the classic. I just kind of say things like, this garbage is getting really full, as I like continue to stuff things down into it, hoping my husband will say, I'll take out the garbage. And then after the third, veiled attempt, and he doesn't, I'm really angry. And he says, why can't you just say you want me to take out the garbage? The people who love you want to help you. And they also appreciate clarity on exactly what would have value to you. So if you say to something, the most helpful thing you could do for me is X, if that person already sees you as a likable badass, if X is within their power to do it, they're not only happy to do it, they are thrilled that you gave them the specificity. So if you would
Mm.
love somebody to promote you, like,
Hmm.
hey, in this audience, or I'm going to go talk to this customer, or I'm going to go try to make this connection, and I know that person really values you, would you go tell them about me? Would you make the introduction? Would you vouch for me? Would you say positive things when I'm not there? It's negotiating. Negotiating is not just for cars, houses, and salaries. It's getting anything you want. So asking somebody, you are valued in this audience. Will you elevate me? I've never had a single person tell me no. They're in contrast, they're like, that's so easy. And if I get some credit, some brownie points for doing that, of course I'm doing it. And they're happy that they know exactly what it is that I want rather than them having to run around guessing what's going to make me happy. So those are some of the places to start, I think, with making it easy.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. So a few pieces of context. That's one of the reasons that this show exists. I was very curious. I had a bunch of friends who were doing amazing things and a large audience that I was excited to share with them about. And since 2009, when this show started,
Which is amazing.
I mean, but it was reciprocity. I felt like I was getting all this knowledge from conversations with my friends who were badasses. And I was like, wow, if we could just, rather than me having these conversations in private and then figuring out how to tell other people later, let's just have these conversations in public. So, and now it makes, and as I was reading the book, made perfect sense to me. One of the things that was very intriguing, and I'm going to, this is simultaneously an experiment, and I'm trying to practice what you're preaching. So I have a book. I have just announced it. It's coming out on October 8th. We're in the pre-order phase right now. And by the way, everyone on this who's a listener right now is really good at buying books and supporting authors. So Likeable Badass is already on everybody's list. We're making that happen. We're going to use me as an experiment now so that I don't have to make some assumptions about what you think and don't think, because I know what I'm thinking and scared of. You said be very specific. So let's just say I have a book coming out. It's called Never Play It Safe. It drops on October 8th. And my goal is to have been demonstrating that I am a badass and creating value for others. So how do you, in this moment, if you would, coach me on how anyone who's listening and has not yet bought a pre-order copy of my book, or 3 or 10, because that's really where stuff starts to move the needle. You know how important it is for authors. Help me make the ask in real time here and tell me what the optimum one is and what some lesser ones, and maybe we can run an experiment on why some are better than others.
Yeah, so I absolutely to make the ask. So a couple of different things. One is always try to sell it in terms of the benefit to other people. So if you're,
For sure.
you're right. So what's in it? Why did I write it? What are you going to get out of it beyond not just helping me, but beyond like how it's going to actually help you accelerate and advance? So always thinking about sharing that story is really important. And then the idea of explaining why it's particularly valuable to you. And I think that when there's so much, right, that and this is like true of authors, you don't know how this works until you do it the first time. When you do it, it's a bananas world, and you're like,
Totally.
it's a bizarre world, right? You're like, oh my gosh, and then you have to then educate other people on how it works, because there's things that people truly don't understand that want to be able to to help you, and so to be able to say this is why pre-ordering, for example, rather than ordering, actually makes a difference, because why would anyone actually know that?
Sure.
But then to think about what else you could do that is in it for them. So thinking things about when I was thinking about this, like who's in like endorsements of the book, for example. Endorsements of the book are essentially other promotion. So when you share, like, here are the kind words that other people have shared, you are essentially getting other people to be able to promote you. But I do think the ask should be specific, and it should explain what the value is to the person, and it should explain what the value is to you. But the biggest advantage that you actually have has nothing to do with those three things. It has to do with the fact that before you even got to this point, you have shown up as capable and caring. You have a massive audience that has been generating content that you provide to them for free, and that you are seen as a thought leader. Those two things, right? People want to be in a relationship with you. They want to support you. They want to hear what you have to say next. Those two things are not easy to create on a dime.
Yeah.
So what I would say to people is the easiest time to build your status is when you don't need anything. Right. So it's easy to coach you because you've already done the hardest thing, which is from day one, I've put out into
for
the
20
world.
years, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Like,
what is it? The line is the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today.
Exactly. And I
Right.
feel that what's 100% true about status, which is the reality is because you have status in that audience, as you should, then these asks aren't that hard. And you could say, I really want your support. I wrote it for you. Here's what's great about it. Here's the specific action you could take. Let me make it easy for you. Here's the button you can click.
Mhm.
And there you go. And you don't have to worry about it as much. What's harder is coaching somebody who has I have zero social media presence. I have some friends and family, but that list is only going to get so big. How do I go on social and try to get people to buy my book? And I said, well, it's harder because you can show that you're capable, but it's harder to show up as caring I'm about you because it looks very self-interested. You're trying to get me to buy your book. And so the caring piece is hard to create the status while you're simultaneously asking for something. And I think
Mm.
whether you're an author or whether you're just, working in your own entrepreneurial career or whatever it is, it's really hard to show up in someone's face and say, I want something. And oh, by the way, it's at this moment that I'm going to make you realize how brilliant and caring I actually am. It can be done, but it's hard. So I think, I don't know if that gives you the coaching that you
Oh yeah,
want,
for
but I
sure.
think
And
you're in great shape for it because
yeah,
of
I
what
feel
you've
like
already
I know.
built.
I feel like I know,
Yeah.
but hearing it from you, and my goal is for this to connect with someone else in their own life. Like we're using me as an example because I can
Yeah.
say
Right.
I have a thing. I've been doing a ton of work. I genuinely am doing this work because I care about others, and I feel that a more creative and curious world is going to be a better world. And yet, hearing it from you, who just wrote the book on being a likable badass, it carries sort of weight. And so thank you for lending your status to me for a moment there. And in exchange, like to me, this is part of what's beautiful about, social construct. You can either say, oh man, so you're saying that Chase has a podcast and he does it for 15 years so he can promote two books. The ROI on that is not very good. So there has to be something that's genuine underneath that because no one's going to do something 400 times a year in order to make two asks over, a 20-year arc. And yet, having heard that from an expert that, no, this is why you work on things that you care about because it feels effortless and it feels joyful. And you feel, as your 15-year-old son, like, oh, I would like to connect this person and my mom because I think there's mutual value there. And
Yeah.
hearing that from you matters. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, and so I just want to amplify that yes, there's a lot of ways you can build your status that are quick and easy, and we have to have the low effort things, but we also have to selectively invest in the high effort things. The podcast is a super high effort thing. People say to me, Allison, when will you have a podcast? And I say, what's better than having a second home? A friend with a second home. And you know what's better than having a podcast? A friend with a podcast. Because then you can be a professional podcast guest with
Yep.
all of the audience and none of the tremendous work. It's a lot of work, but it works for you because you love it. So, as an example
Yes.
for me, I've been a professor for 20 years. I couldn't even count the number of late night phone calls, texts, emails I've gotten from students on job negotiations. I just got an offer. Can you help me? I do everything I can to take every single one of those calls. I do not charge people for my time. I just take them. And it's a lot of work over time. Every individual one isn't a big deal, but and my kids, like how many times they've seen me with an AirPod just in one ear as I'm driving them somewhere, helping somebody. And I do it. But here's the thing, to your point, is now that I'm launching this book and I've gone to my network and said, same thing you're saying,
Yep.
a couple things. One is you think people might be turned off about, oh, you're all you're doing is talking about your book. No, my followers just keep growing because people who care about you want to hear about it and they want to help you. But also the people who have come out of the woodwork and said, you may not
Yeah.
remember, but 15 years ago,
Yeah.
you helped me in this thing. And the reality is something I don't remember. I know who they are, but I don't remember the conversation. And they are like lining up to help me and
Yeah.
introducing me. And but the way reason it worked for you and for me is because yes, if all you were doing at the time was like, oh my god, I can't believe another one of these, but someday I'm going to sell a book, that's not going to work. But if you're
That's
doing it
just
with
bad
joy,
math too. That's bad
right?
math.
Yeah, if you're
Like,
doing it with joy and you're pouring into people, pouring love into people, that there are so many ways that you can that it will return to you, but sometimes you need to ask for it. And that idea of if you just pour in and you never make the ask, yeah, some people will come to you and say, is there something I can do? But what's been more clear to me is when I've said to people, here's how you can support, all these people who raise their hand and they say, yes, please, I would like to, be in line. What else can I do? So it's the combo of finding those sometimes higher effort ways to add
Yeah.
value to people over time. But as long as you've done it with joy in the moment, all I can tell you is at some point, right, you'll be able to call it in. You don't necessarily know what for or what, and you'll be so heartwarmed by how many people you didn't know you impacted that are waiting there to help you.
Mm, so clearly articulated and in such a heartfelt, human frame that I really, really appreciate. And that is, again, one of the reasons that I'm a huge fan of the book. I want to say the title again, Likeable Badass. And now we're going to go into the subhead, how women get the success they deserve. You've already been very clear this is not a gender specific book. And yet in the subheading, you call out women. I do think it's very important for us to acknowledge as an example that because, for example, of a gender or race, things that are not controllable, some people are, I'll say, denied status um, for the wrong reasons. Help us understand why you wrote this book specifically targeted at women and what people who are on what I would call the negative side of that paradigm, how they can use your work to rise up, claim some of
Yeah.
this power that's rightfully theirs.
So I wrote the book for women because it's the audience I've come to really care about and love serving. So I built my life, like many people do, in audiences that were majority male, whether it was my MBA students, whether it was my companies I would speak to more men than women. But it was always the women who would want to seek me out. One, I think because I looked like them, and two, because they had problems that their male colleagues didn't have with getting status and power and being influential. And in that moment, it was like this massive aha to me that, oh, wait a second, you can actually use your knowledge of organizational psychology and your lived experience as a woman who can empathize with these challenges and bring those two things together and say, I might be in a unique position to help women understand how to use behavioral science. And I could be a good messenger because I use that science in my field to try to navigate the same problems you're trying to navigate.
Hmm.
And so I started speaking to groups of women and audiences of women. And when it came time to write the book, I said, I want to write this for women. So when I had my book agent and when I sold this book, I said to them very clearly, there are two things I will not negotiate. So if you care, just move along. I will not I will call it Likeable Badass. We changed the subtitle, but it's going to be called Likeable Badass. And this is a book for women. Do not tell me that it is a book for everyone because I know that because I do the research. But this is my audience. And if I don't write it, it's not getting written. And that's the audience I'm writing for. So that's what, and I always say that yes, because one, um, I know that women, among others, have status challenges that some people don't. And I wanted to give women tools to be able to do that. And I thought, you know what? For so many years, women, and not just women, right? But women, people of color, anybody, have been left out of the high status, high power conversations where all the secrets get told and the secrets to success. And I said, what if wouldn't that be cool if we could just put information that was useful to everybody and then put it in a book that had women on the title, so then only women read it and then they got the advantage that they deserve. It's really just because it's an audience that I care about.
Yeah.
But a very flattering thing that has been said to me by men who have read this book, or even the producer who produced my audiobook, a man that I had not met until he was handed this job of listening to me read it for days. He said the very last thing he said to me when we said goodbye was, why'd you write this for women? Because I got a lot out of it. And I said, it makes me really, happy to hear. And I think it's true. But it's it's just that's the audience that right now I feel really, really called to serve. And so I said, well, that's the audience that I'm gonna write to. But it is a broader message than that. And it's by no means, as you said, status is something we all contend with, and
Right.
gender is not the only basis of status. And so I really, as I say, like my classes, it's open to anybody curious enough to figure out what it's about and invest the time. Any and all are welcome.
I would share that sentiment. I have to express it as a male. I found it, there was not one time where I struggled to see either why you wrote it for women or did I not get maximum value. So thank you very much for a staggering work of genius. Again, the title is Likeable Badass, How Women Get the Success They Deserve. And it is very, very broadly applicable because, as you said in the introduction and just repeated there, status and power, they are resources that we can all use more of. and importantly, ideally, using it for good beyond just ourselves and in service of others. That has what I believe you've done today as a part of this show. Thank you for providing your insights, available everywhere books are sold. Dr. Fragale, is there anywhere else you would send us besides to go pre-order your book? Because we're going to time this with your launch. Anywhere else you'd like to direct our watchers and listeners' attention while we have it?
Yes, while they're shopping, they can pre-order both of our books. So mine and
Exactly.
yours. That's where I'll direct them. Say
Oh,
yours again.
that was a
Say
great
the
gift of status right there and
yeah.
power. And thank you
Tell me the
so much.
title again.
The title is Never Play It Safe.
Oh, never played it. Yeah.
And the irony is that we were recording this here in mid-August. My book gets announced in 48 hours, and it's available for purchase for the next 8 weeks.
Okay, so I wasn't living
leading up.
under a rock of my own, like
Nope, you have
self-absorption, that I didn't know that this existed.
Correct.
Okay.
I'm
All right, good.
future traveling to when this comes out to what will
100%.
exist in the universe.
Got it.
And we got to put this back on you. Thank you so much for writing a very, very important book on a topic, as I indicated early on in our conversation, is a little slippery and a little scary because the seeking of these things. Thank you for scientifically orienting us and then for backing it up so authentically with your message. Really appreciate you. We're out there to support Likeable Badass. You're welcome as a guest on the show anytime. And thank you for showing up today.
Thank you for having me. Anytime you want to have me back, but this is amazing. I could talk to you all day.
Awesome. Until next time, from Alison and myself, we hope you have an amazing day.